So I need everyone here to do me a favor and ask themselves, why am I in college? If you said something like, to get a degree, then you're thinking more extrinsically. But if you said something similar to, I want to learn to make a difference in the world, you're thinking intrinsically. Just to clarify, intrinsic motivation is the desire to do something, to do or achieve something because one truly wants to and takes pleasure or sees value in doing so. While extrinsic motivation is the desire to do or achieve something, not so much for the enjoyment of the activity itself, but because it will produce a certain result. So intrinsic motivation is kind of having a reason, a purpose for something that you're doing that's important to you, and extrinsic is more following set guidelines and kind of not really questioning why you're doing something. So my major claim is going to be that society fails to motivate individuals intrinsically. And the 3 ways I want to prove this are through schools, social norms, and social media. So the first point I want to make is that society fails, or my first main point is that society fails to motivate students intrinsically in schools. A lot of students are faced with busy work, and there's no clear explanation as to why they're working. And someone who kind of was intrinsically motivated and didn't fit into the school system was Steve Jobs. And so he refused to go to classes that he was required to, and he attended the ones he wanted to go to instead. And eventually he ended up dropping out because he thought it was a waste of time and he really didn't know what he wanted to do. So he left school to pursue his passion, and eventually he found it, and he founded Apple. So an example of a not intrinsically motivated person was a student interviewed by Yukai, who was an author of a book on behavioral design. And this student was basically a 4.0 student who did great on the SAT, and Yokai asked him what he wanted to be, and the student said he wanted to be a scientist. And Yokai said, oh, he must be pretty good at math. And the student kind of looked at him confused. He had never made the connection that math was going to prepare him for his future. He kind of just went to math class and got A's in all his classes just because that's what he needed to do to graduate. So school's not really emphasizing intrinsic motivation. So my second point is that social norms fail to motivate students intrinsically. So just to clarify, Stanford University defines social norms as the customary rules that govern behavior in groups and societies. So something like a handshake, or saying hello, or chewing with your mouth closed. It's the do's and don'ts in society. And so a social norm that lacks intrinsic motivation, the one I want to focus on, is the process of life, which is really described in go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a degree, graduate, get a job, buy a house, start a family. So these are kind of just words without meaning, without explanation, and it's kind of a process on repeat. And the people who ask why and are intrinsically motivated a lot of times defy the norms. And an example of this is Martin Luther King Jr., who kind of questioned what was a social norm and what was actually a law, the inequality among people, and that resulted in a movement. Another defying norms is entrepreneurship, which is basically people who are intrinsically motivated and take their ideas and turn them into businesses. An example would be Oprah Winfrey, who grew up, and so one day she was on a radio station and she was really recognized for being passionate, and she was eventually offered her own show. Another example is Walt Disney, who loved to draw, and he wanted to create something unlike anything else, and he followed his passion and he created Disneyland. So these activists and these entrepreneurs are some of the people who deviate from social norms by being intrinsically motivated. And my third point is that social media fails to motivate students intrinsically. People using social media are motivated by extrinsic factors. In a document by Dr. Underwood, professor of psychology, and Dr. Ferris, professor of sociology, they had a study where they interviewed 13-year-olds and asked them why they use social media. And a third of them said just to see what their friends are doing. A fifth said to make sure people aren't saying negative things about them. So they're really just concerned with what other people think. And they spend ridiculous amounts of time on their phones. So according to Statista, one of the world's most successful databases, The average person is on their phone for 118 minutes a day, which is basically just 2 hours of being concerned with what other people think of you. And so, in conclusion, society fails to motivate students intrinsically. Society overlooks purpose, not the purpose everyone else gives it, but rather its purpose to the individual. This intrinsic motivation is what allows the individual to know who they are before they know what they want to do. If society motivates students intrinsically, they will say, I want to learn as a tool to reach my goal and make a difference, or I hope to master physics to send a shuttle to the moon. That is what schools don't teach, that is what norms don't cover, and that is what social media doesn't post. Thank you.
All right, let's start with a couple of things that went really well. The organization is fine. You do a good job explaining assumptions in the body of the speech, so we kind of know where you're going. I thought that your definitions at the beginning of the speech were solid. They kind of explained the concept behind what you're talking about and helped give us a base for following the ideas that you're talking about. I also thought your proposition was very clear at the beginning of the speech, and there's a good layout of what the structure is going to be in the speech. So all the structural stuff is solid, and there's good background. Now, proving your individual points, I think, is a little bit more problematic. You're dependent on a lot of examples, and examples are not bad places to start, but they ought to be followed up by some other information. So, although Steve Jobs is one of those people that can be intrinsically motivated and make a success, I'm not sure that everybody who's intrinsically motivated reaches those heights of accomplishment or produces in the same way. And the notion that intrinsic thinkers or people who process that way are going to get greater results or more satisfactory results, I think is, that's kind of the position that you're taking, but I'm not sure how well it's demonstrated. And you've got another example there about a kid who wants to be a scientist who didn't really understand the relationship of math to science, but they are motivated to do well in their classes. So then the question becomes, so what will they accomplish less because they were extrinsically motivated than they were intrinsically motivated? If they ultimately do become a scientist and do well on those things, the question then becomes, are they going to be more innovative? And that's, I think, the thing that's kind of hard to prove. It's like I said, a little bit esoteric. On the second point, you mentioned extrinsic thinking, and you kind of go through the I don't want to say the pointlessness of life, but it describes a series of people do things in particular stages, and they work through those sorts of things without necessarily understanding whether they want to do those things or whether it's important or appropriate to do those kinds of things. And I can see that there's probably some point to that, but I'm not exactly sure that you demonstrate that there is a lack of utility in doing those kinds of things. And in fact, my guess would be that a lot of those sorts of things are beneficial to the society, even if they are normative. The suggestion seems to be that things that are outside the norm are helpful. I'm sure that that is true at times, but I think things outside of the norm can also be problematic at times, and those things that are normative often create the kind of structure that allow those who are intrinsic thinkers to maybe be a little bit more successful. So again, I think you've explained the concept here well. Proving it is a little bit more problematic. On the third point on social media, it basically comes down to what are people spending their time doing, and your suggestion here is probably not too different from what a lot of people would argue about social media, that it ends up being a lot of wasted time where you're concerned about checking your likes and checking in with your friends and doing a lot of social comparison on that. And the notion that social comparison is problematic, that it's a waste of time, that's a presupposition. I think you need to demonstrate that it's it does in fact hinder people's productivity, that it undermines creative thinking instead of taking that as a given. I think that that's a problem there. I thought you could do a little bit more effectively in presenting the argument. You're speaking well and the language is fine, but your engagement with the audience is, I think, very slight. You had a nice summary at the end of the speech reminding us of what the theories and the points were that you were trying to present, and I appreciate that. All right, thank you.